This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. You're listening to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and this week's episode comes from a live panel discussion on West Coast Pils that I moderated a few weeks ago at our Brewers Retreat in Asheville, North Carolina. What's the Brewers Retreat, you ask? Just my absolute favorite brewing event of the year. Picture, if you will, the back lawn of the Sierra Nevada Brewery in Mills River, behind the garden, next to the bocce courts. Now picture 5 10-gallon Ruby Street homebrew systems set up under a giant tent where 5 groups of a dozen event attendees brew together, led by leaders of the brewing world like Ken and Brian Grossman, Vinny Chilurzo, Natalie Chilurzo, Matt Brennelson, and more. And then picture morning seminars, awesome dinners, including a seafood and barbecue scorcher at Burial's Forestry Camp, closing night multi-course pairing dinner at Sierra Nevada, evening bottle shares, a deep sense of camaraderie around the shared passion that we have for brewing. There's plenty out there on ours and in breweries' social media feeds that tell some of the story. There's quite a bit that you just had to be there for, like a special panel and tasting hosted by Brian and Vinny, where they dug into test bottles from a Brett Beer collaboration from many years ago and then shared old Russian River bottles from Brian's personal cellar. But this panel discussion on West Coast Pils, featuring Bob Kunz of Highland Park, Chris Johnson of Green Bench, and Evan Price of Green Cheek, is one we wanted to share with all of you. We'll get into the discussion in a minute, but first, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across North America and beyond. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years because brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, nor do they. Quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation drive everything they do, and with their 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need and gain peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain. Now, with all the ease of use benefits of dry yeast, Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of Dry Tropics London yeast. Also, a day in the life of a brewer is packed enough as it is, so why not let Old Orchard assist with R&D? Custom blend development is available through their innovative R&D lab. Their bulk division supplies a wide range of beverage segments, making it the one-stop shop for flavoring beer and beyond. More information or free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. This first panel is going to be a conversation about West Coast Pilsner. And since we had Bob and Evan and Chris, all Pilsner lager brewers, and that intersection of hops, figured it'd be nice to have this conversation. Quick introduction, we can start at the end with Bob. Bob, why'd you start brewing West Coast Pils? Why did you invent West Coast Pils, as Vinny has said here?
Probably maybe 2014 or 2015 kind of planted the seed. It was a very simple idea. We needed a cask of beer for a cask ale festival, and we... I didn't push that right. Okay. And we just had the thought that we kind of wanted to merge a West Coast IPA we had with a German Pils that we had to sort of like lighten it up and make it a little more crisp, but have that sort of like hop impact. And that was the birth of it for us. We made that cask and we were like, yes, there's something to this. This is like a world of flavor and experience that I liked and wanted to explore. At that point in time, Highland Park Brewery was just me and one other person, Tim McDonald. So we developed a beer called Timbo Pils. And And that was kind of just our little baby moment in time to explore the birth of that flavor we got in that cask into a beer. And then it, took on a life for us with Timbo, but more sort of like lager fermentation, heavy hop, West Coast sort of influence.
And now we're in a world where lots and lots of West Coast IPA is brewed with lager yeast, and all of those lines are blurred. And probably tracks back some, in some way to what you guys were doing there. Chris, you're a lager brewer and an IPA brewer, and so this kind of subject brings both of those sides together for you.
Yeah, I mean, we opened Green Bench 12 years ago now, and we were. We started fairly hop forward. We actually weren't making lagers at all to start with. So ultimately, like our number one seller is a West Coast IPA. Our number two seller is an American Pilsner. So those are kind of the styles that we make the most now. We also make a lot of fermentation forward beers. And that's kind of what we started with, was like hops and fermentation forward beers. And then a few years in, I had always been interested in making lager and that being an important part of our portfolio, but I didn't know how to do it. I wasn't trained to sort of make lager. The sort of school of sort of brewing that I went to, which wasn't actually school, it was working. But I worked at Cigar City and we weren't making lager there. Actually, back then, the conversation was always, you kind of got made fun of if you made lager a little bit. It was like, why would you do that? Like, you can get lager at the grocery store, and we're making things that you can't get, that are more interesting and flavorful, and also it's going to take 3 times the amount of time. Like, why would I lock up the tank with these 5, 6, 7, 8 week, beers when I could make, 3 IPAs in that time period. So definitely started heavy on IPA and then have grown to become a real lover of sort of lager brewing as well.
Sure. Evan, give us a little bit of your background in that intersection of lager and hops.
I'm Evan. My voice isn't quite what it should be. Late nights, Neil Fisher and tequila is... dangerous for sure. So my path for lager really comes from in 2009. I was at this brewery making a lot of wheat beer with lots of oranges in it, and I wanted to change this path and start working at a slower pace but more intentional kind of brewing. And so I took this job at Taps with Victor Novak, who is somebody who I still love and respect. And we were making a range of different lager beers there that I was really jumping into for the first time with this new idea of, instead of high production volumes that I was sort of, or maybe speed that I was used to, instead he's like, no, we're going to take our time. We're going to use German ingredients to make a German style beer, and a range of these sort of things that were really influential on me. In 2011, we got signed up for the Sierra Nevada Beer Camp, and we did this pills with crystal in it for our group, and that was a kind of turning point of this idea for me of using American or more like kind of West Coast hops in a lager beer. And so in 2012, I took this job at a brewery called Noble Ale Works in Anaheim, and I came out with this. I had a hop rep come by and teach me about Motueka. And so he was talking about how it's, Vinny could probably correct me here on this, the daughter of Saaz or something like that. And so I wanted to create this Czech style pills, Bohemian Pilsner malt, German hops during the boil, but then Motueka, Whirlpool, Motueka dry hop, and we just called it a Czech style pills with Motueka. And, ran with that for a while, and then opening up Green Cheek, we have always just kind of made new beers every week. And so it's been a completely different path than Bob's, where he's put effort into, making flagships and stuff like that. And we, on the other hand, have just kind of continued to make new beers every week. And so we have made West Coast Pils or Hoppy Lager or versions of the different name throughout the years.
We'll be back with more in a second, but first, give your customers a pleasant surprise with Audacia in your next IPA. Brought to you by Indie Hops, this descendant of Strata brings her own flair and catchy lilac lavender aroma and flavors of sweet tart berries and with tangy lychee. Audacia loves family reunions with Strata and has even more fun when Citra, Simcoe, Amarillo, and others join the party. Let Audacia loose and watch the smiles spread. Indie Hops' life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And looking for a powerful no-rinse sanitizer that gets the job done fast? Meet SaniClean PAA Pro from 5 Star Chemicals. This EPA-registered PAA-based acid sanitizer is tough on beer stone and perfect for everything from kegs to packaging lines. Available in 2 convenient sizes, it's ideal for coarse sprayers, fermenters, and more. Trusted by pros, designed for performance, SaniClean PAA Pro helps you brew with confidence. Learn more at 5starchemicals.com. Brew better. Brew with 5 Star. Also, this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com.
Let's start with a kind of a big, broad question about West Coast Pilsner. For all of us who are deep into beer, you can see a clear difference between what people would call IPL of the early 2010s and this later evolution of West Coast Pils primarily. I think those really great expressions of what we now call West Coast Pils capture a lot of that. They capture enough of that sulfur lager fermentation character to still echo the idea of Pilsner. I think some of that is just necessary to convey Pilsner-ness in that scope versus IPL, which seemed to focus with a little more malt and kind of steer away from that kind of thing. But Bob, for you, as you're thinking about the way that hops flavors play in this lager fermentation zone with some of that Pilsner-like sulfur character, and I guess it's not even Pilsner-like, it is Pilsner sulfur character. How do you think about the way that those hop and fermentation flavors interact? And because they can be beautiful, but they can also be a train wreck if they're not balanced correctly. How do you kind of work that push and pull?
I think it's like fundamental for that style, or for us, it's like the style exists as one thing, but we're kind of more like exploring flavor and trying to get at the sensory experience of the beer. And so, it's like we're making all our West Coast beers with Chico or ale yeast, and they have this ester expression that is more like a richer fruit character. And I just found that when we started, it started with Timbo, but then just to prioritize our yeast management, that we were finding that we wanted, we were a very small brewery and we wanted to go multi-gen on our yeast. And so we started sneaking it into our IPAs. And we were just finding that the flavor profile that I like, and that maybe is influenced by our climate in Southern California, whatever it may be, was this interaction of modern hops, which tend to be maybe more tropical and fruit driven, and these sulfur or thiol sort of tropical notes as well, that just I wasn't finding in the ale fermentations. Ales they tended to be a richer fruit expression that wasn't what we were looking for. And so we just kind of kept I guess just exploring that more and more and turning the knobs of how we were controlling our fermentation to get the outputs of flavor that we were trying to like find in those beers. And you know, I think you kind of get, you end up moving into like a homerism. You feed the thing you like, but then you kind of keep going in that direction because you're exposed to it more and more. So whatever that may be, now we have an internal thing for us at Highland Park Brewery. We have like, you know, a team of 7 people on our brew team, and it's funny to see like just our preference for that and our internal development. And it just goes to this, like I said, I don't know if it's climate driven. I don't know if it's us just reinforcing our own biases towards what we're already doing or whatever, but it just seems more tropical. And I've never been opposed to sulfur. Like I like it in my lagers, and you know, I feel like it amplifies the hops. The hops seem to hold on longer in the packaged product. And so it's just like there's multitudes of things that are kind of like stacking that I'm like, yeah, this is the right direction for us. And, you know, it may be, I mean, honestly, in 2016 or 17, as we kept like sneaking in lager ferments into our West Coast IPAs, I was doing it kind of like, people gonna know, whatever. And then I'd like get in front of a brewer, and the brewer would be like, this is awesome. I like this beer. This is great. And they wouldn't even think that it was a lager fermentation. And so then we just kept doing it. And then we're just like, we should just own this. Like, you know, we're not trying to trick people. We're just trying to explore flavor and the expression that we were like drawn to, and having other people experience it. And that's kind of where we're landing, where we're at now, I guess.
I want to come back to this, subject of how you might treat those fermentations a little different, whether your goal is IPA made with a lager yeast versus West Coast pills. We'll come back to that, but I want to, stay on this kind of balancing hop flavor and sulfur character. Chris, for you, you also, in your lagers, that character, fermentation character is a big part of it. And, how do you think about the balance of those flavors?
Yeah, I mean, I think first, when I think of like the term hoppy lager, a lot of my lagers are hoppy, and a lot of them are very traditional lagers. And so, like, obviously, in the context of those that know, if you say hoppy lager, we're mostly obviously meaning probably, U.S. or, new age sort of, whether it be Southern Hemisphere or sort of U.S. hops sort of profile. So, I do find myself saying like I would rather call it something like a West Coast Pils or something like that, just for the naming sake, just to sort of draw a distinction, because I do find, like, to put this into perspective a little bit, oftentimes at my brewery I'll have, right now even, I've got, we've got Postcard Pils on, we have Swiss Pils on, we have North American Pils on, we have Bay Pils on, we have like 2 different Czech pale lagers as well. There's 7 basically Pilsners on tap at any given moment at our brewery, and a lot of them are very hoppy. So like to sort of communicate to my customer of what this looks like, if I'm making something like West Coast Pils, my mindset is to sort of take the same process I would do normally for a Pilsner, but essentially use hops that have completely different character than, say, traditional ones. So even for me, it's not even as much about blending in, say, like traditional German hops or Czech hops. It's about using from the ground up sort of this new age hop profile against a Pilsner profile that complements it. And in this sense is going to be something that I'm looking for to be extremely pale. And to draw another distinction on my tap list, I find we are in Florida, not literally on like the west coast of the country. We're on the west coast of Florida, though. We are technically Gulf Coast. So the other west coast. I would say our market, and we're definitely a part of the influence on that, still likes West Coast IPA with color, still likes West Coast IPA with a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of body. And while we will make West Coast IPA sort of modern West Coast IPA, we find that there's interest, but there's not as much like people aren't ordering it multiple times. They're like, cool, I had this new West Coast IPA I want Sunshine City again, right? Which has a little bit of color to it. And sort of malt character, but it's still obviously very hop tropical driven. So we find that West Coast Pils or hoppy Pils, if we're talking about it, and that sort of context works really well to play with that. It's actually a way in which I think our customer can like kind of understand pale, sort of new age hopped beer, more so than even what we would consider like a modern West Coast IPA in my market. And so to sort of answer your question, I do find that already one of the things I love about lager is the fermentation character, depending on how you treat that, depending on what yeast you use, depending on what temperature, depending on exactly like what your fermentation profile is, and they can be massively varied. I do love the interplay of fermentation with hops, which is not any different to me in my head as fermentation with hops that are from continental Europe. And so it's just seeing what that same profile can create with a different kind of hop profile. So that's kind of really, we look at it. I literally keep it pretty traditional, even on sort of West Coast or hoppy Pilsner. It's still almost the same process that I would use for like a German Pils. And then it's just literally hopped with sort of new age varieties just to see what the interplay might be and to draw a massive distinction. That's how you can have 7-8 Pilsners on tap, right? They all taste very different from one another. It's like going to a brewery though and saying, oh, they've got 7 hazy IPAs. It's kind of the same thing, right? But I find it even more interesting and a higher distinction because the malt profile on those can also play a significant difference in those beers. And it's not just like a hazy base with 12 different combinations of hops, right? So I find that even more intriguing and more interesting. And I guess to sort of piggyback off what you said a minute ago, you mentioned having a Czech lager that you use Motueka in. So we do a series of beers. We've got a few like year-round Czech style lagers, but I also do this seasonal Czech lager thing. And so the summer just ended, obviously, and for our summer lager, it's called Letní lager. Letní in Czech means summer. So it's just summer lager, basically. And essentially, as an example, it's an extremely traditional Czech-style pale lager. It's all Moravian, floor-malted, under-modified malts from Hana. It has a touch of C10 for color, which is like 2.5%, 3%. We do a triple decoction on it. 10-minute boils each, and then it's hopped entirely with a bunch of Cosmic and Schlottic and a little bit of Sods hops, except at the Whirlpool, we add like a little bit of Strata. And it completely changes the profile, especially against like the Budvar yeast that we ferment it with. It provides this like extremely fruity, like aromatic, like it almost is like you're like eating I would say it kind of reminds me of like Haribo's gummies. Like it has like this like really fruity character against this backdrop of something that is extremely traditional. And that's all it takes is like a couple pounds of this in the Whirlpool just to completely throw that thing to something that I find extremely special and interesting and unique. And that's like an interplay of like tradition and sort of new age hop that we like to play with.
It's super fun. It's just like the subtlety of just like this, like just like little chef's kiss in order to like make something just that much different. Super thoughtful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a microphone.
That's a really interesting idea, using contemporary hops in this classic kind of iteration. Does the inverse of that work for these modern West Coast pills, where having some sort of touchstone or base of classic or noble-ish hops also builds a little bit of Pilsner character that hops, modern hops can play on top of? Are any of you all working in that kind of space?
I feel like you're working more into that space.
I mean, it may not even be hop specific, but it's like, yesterday during the brew day, I kept saying this. It's like we're dry hopping these beers at a very high hopping rate, and we're always looking to find balance. So it's not just all these hops sitting on this thin, flimsy base. So we're trying to build structure in the beer to hold those hops. And we found that lower alpha hops are doing that as well. They're lending body through tannins. And so that has been one aspect of our approach into making lower ABV, heavily dry hopped beers, which is what our West Coast Pils ends up being. So we're trying to build structure, and we do get that from that, whether it's continental hops or American grown or Southern Hemisphere. We're looking for some lower alpha acid, more vegetative matter, hopefully building some structure.
Are there certain hops, in those varying spheres that you find do a really nice job of building that base? And, if so, like what kind of percentage in a
overall hop bill would that part of the hop piece be?
I mean, we'll give the shout out to Roy Farms because Adina has been in Timbo for a long time. And I think, we lean towards, I kind of have a sustainability lean. So I'm trying to utilize ingredients as close to where we are. So I'm trying to find American grown replacements or whatever that may be. So that's why I really like Adina. When we first started developing those beers, they were continental hops. Maybe it was a Saaz or maybe, whatever it may be. But now we tend to lean towards U.S. grown. They tend to be maybe fresher and more predictable as to the product that we're going to get. But then, that sustainability lean, I think we like.
Is there a general percentage that you think about in body, and how do you add them through the hot side to get that effect?
I'm not very good at the like specifics. Sometimes I got to look at the recipes. We tend to load those a little later on the hot side. So maybe we do like a 30-minute addition. And maybe it's like 50% of our bitterness is coming from our 60-minute addition, and 50% of our bitterness, or maybe I'll actually say it more like this because this has been our approach to get that structure. 50% of our vegetive load is at 60 minutes. 50% of our vegetive load is at 30 minutes. And that's kind of our approach, is maybe a total vegetive load and hitting a total alpha acid amount, as if that's making sense. And so I think we've landed somewhere where it's about 50% vegetative load at those points in time on the hot side.
Actually, I have a question on that one, because we talked about this a little bit yesterday when we were brewing, and you kind of mentioned the same thing, adding sort of low alphas, exactly what you said, for body, right, and for texture and all that, which I found super intriguing and something that I hope to play with when I get back. But so I find with these, and this struck me right when you said it yesterday, was when I think about the different, sort of pilsners that we have, right, I think a lot about obviously ADF and final gravities and everything on each of these. And so my Bavarian Pils is kind of the one that finishes the driest, right? It's usually it could be 1.6, 1.7 sort of Plato final gravity. And then I find that my American Pils, I don't really like to be too much lower than 2. It sort of needs a little bit more body, I find. If I ever do something like a West Coast Pils, I find otherwise it gets entirely too dry for the hop profile that it has, and almost has a perception, ironically, as this is going to sound crazy, it has a perception to me of almost too sweet, even though it's sort of drier because the hops are so tropical. And so I find with those, I don't really want to be necessarily higher than 2.5 final, but I don't want to be below 2. And I ideally want to be closer to 2.4, 2.3, kind of the lowest ideally, versus my Czech lagers, which I'm 3 Plato's perfect. I don't really want to be too much lower than 3 on those ones. And so I find that where I'm building texture and body, it's usually in malt profile, and it's usually in mashing process in order to create fermentability profiles kind of more precisely. So anyway, my question ultimately would be is, where do you like yours finishing, and how do you think that hop load is translating to sort of that texture against that sort of gravity?
I mean, it's interesting because it's I think we have a peer group in California making West Coast hoppy beers, and I've learned that we're kind of an outlier. We have a little bit higher finishing gravities, where a lot of people are making, whether it's West Coast IPA or West Coast Pils, their beers are finishing at 1.5 to 2 Plato. And, our West Coast beers finish at 2.5 plus. And, that's tricky. It's I think when you get up into those higher finishing gravity, you don't want the sweetness perception to be so much so that the beers feel cloying or they feel flabby or, and so then it becomes learning for your system and process what knobs you can turn to give that bitterness backbone that makes it still snappy and drinkable. I mean, that's, I think, what the impetus of us playing in this style is, liking hops, but wanting some drinkability. And I think that drinkability comes from having the right bitterness backbone. So it's tricky, but we finish fairly high, and then it's like playing with our water profile, playing with our bitterness, finding the right knobs to give. We're forever tinkering on every one of our beers because we're never satisfied. And so, every single batch of beer we make, every batch of Timbo probably has a little, we try to just change one variable at a time so that we can see if it made a difference, and we just tinker till we kind of keep getting down the path we want to go.
We'll be back to the conversation in a minute, but when it comes to packaging your brew, think Heartprint, the original in digital can printing. With 3 locations across North America, the Heartprint team has your back from concept to can. Count on fast turnarounds, no minimums, graphic design support, and rock-solid can quality, all in 100% infinitely recyclable cans. Get 10% off your first can order when you mention the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. Open an account at heartprint.com. That's HARTPRINT.com, or email info@heartprint.com for details. And Brightly Software, a Siemens company, partners with organizations at every stage of their asset lifecycle journey. Brightly is a complete asset management and operations software that enhances organizational sustainability, compliance, and efficiency through data-driven decision-making. Streamline maintenance, simplify capital planning, and optimize resources with solutions uniquely designed to support long-term goals. Learn more at brightlysoftware.com.
Evan, how do you play in this space of texture from hops, texture from finishing gravity, and then, of course, using bitterness to balance against those things in hoppy lager?
We've kind of played in all of these different spaces the way that I think both of them have talked about, habitual tinkerers over here as well, So we're in a spot currently where for say West Coast Pills, we're using Simcoe throughout. So we've gone the opposite direction, and we have a 60-minute, a 30-minute, a 15-minute. We have a fair amount of sulfate in those beers too. That I think I was misquoting yesterday when I was on our brew session, but it's like we did this collab with Freem last year, and their interpretation was more German in style, where they're just like, we want it drier, we want it leaner, and we really liked this direction, and so we continue to kind of take it more in that direction instead of this like a little rounder, more Czech pills kind of direction that Bob is talking about. And so, we have this we have a lean malt character where we're using Weirmann Pilsner malt, but and a little bit of spelt in these beers. But from there, higher sulfate, Simcoe throughout, and then the big whirlpool, and then big dry hop as well. But it's like I think the differences between something like Timbo, because I don't get to drink enough of Chris's beers, which is just a shame. Smoked lager, best smoked lager maker in the world here. But the difference between like Timbo Pills and something that we're doing is like our approach has been leaner and drier and snappier, while I think Bob's approach has been almost juicier of sorts. There's a sweetness, there's a mid palate kind of body there, and I like both approaches.
Sure. Well, you started talking about malt, and that's something we haven't talked about yet. For you, Bob, how do you think about malt? Is just straight Pilsner malt in these?
No, I mean, it kind of goes back to this, like, we know we're going to have a lot of hops in there, and we want that base. And so, currently it's like a half raw 2-row, roughly half, and then half. Historically, we used Weirmann floor-malted bow pills. Now we use Admiral Pills, which is a California malt. And that Weirmann floor-malted bow pills or the Admiral Pills are malts that are very pale in color, but I would say much higher in character than that raw two-row. And so they have some toastiness, some breadiness. And I think that malt lends, once again, some of that like structure and that breadiness and that weight to the beer. So we were at that, let's say it's 45% raw two-row, 45% environment floor malted bow pills, and then like a 10% environment carafoam. And now we've swapped in the Admiral pills for that environment malt. But that's generally our approach. One thing that like I'm sure you're getting at here, and that I think is something that we've recognized when we made the transition to making all of our West Coast IPAs with 3470. We are like primary West Coast IPAs called Hello LA. So Timbo and Hello LA are both Mosaic and Citra dry hopped beers. Hello LA has a base of raw two-row and then Vienna and carafoam. And then Timbo has this 45% of a floor malted grain bill. And I just say that because forever we were kind of like, why are these beers so different? They have the same fermentation profile. They have the same dry hopping regimen. And I just kind of keep coming back to this floor malt. There's something about the floor malted aspect was bringing in this like higher tropical note to the beer, or a higher sulfur note to Timbo. And so, two almost identical beers. Hello LA is 6.8%. Timbo is 5.8%. And pretty noticeably different hop expression and sort of like fermentation profile. And I just always attributed it. I'm like, the malt is the one variable. So, and it's made us think about that a fair amount more, that there's, it's like thiols are kind of the hot topic of just like flavor expression because they're tropical. And we kind of live in this world where people really enjoy tropical flavors. And a lot of those precursors are coming, it's not happening in your fermenter. They're developing earlier on in the process. And so, yeah, I don't know the science behind it, but I feel fairly confident that, a lot of those precursors are coming from the malt side.
That's absolutely fascinating, because if anyone has listened to the Alberta panel discussion that I had on the podcast recently, Chelsea from Polyrhythm mentioned using Hogarth floor malted malt from Alberta, and that it did the exact same thing, more thiol expression, more kind of tropical fruit character. And so to hear, even for you with floor malted, environment, boat pills, like to see the same kind of effect there, I think we're going to have to do a little more digging into the effect of floor malted barley on that kind of expression. Interesting, fascinating. Yeah. But I love it when you hear the same thing in two different contexts within like 3 weeks. There's something there. How about you, Chris? In terms of malt, and then do you use malt again to differentiate? And I guess this is also a question for Evan eventually, like using some of that malt to differentiate between the IPA space, where you also might be using the same type of Weihenstephan yeast, and versus this kind of Pilsner approach. How do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think fairly traditionally when it comes to sort of any lager profile or lager brewing, but specifically malt profile on it. We've done all sorts of things, and we've, again, also played around with this a lot, namely because I don't have like a core brand sort of West Coast Pils, so it's not something that like I feel stuck to in any specific way yet. And so we've done things like, different types of Pilsner malts. We've used Raven sort of floor malted Pils before, which is nice, but it gives you like a little too much like hay kind of grassiness, I think. I've used obviously Environment Pils. We use a lot of Best Malts Pils as well. Like I like just their base Pilsner, but the malt that we use the most actually from them is Heidelberg, which is it's like a very, very pale, you'll probably hear me talk about it later too. It's very pale, high DP as well. So it's like highly enzymatic. I usually build profiles via decoction, via mashing processes. So if I'm looking to get a little more character from my malt and I'm looking to lock in fermentability, I'm usually using that as my way of creating sort of body, creating a little bit more sweetness and sort of color and, something to sort of balance out maybe a super dry hoppy thing. So I find with those, in order to sort of lock in fermentability, a single decoction to mash out is pretty good. Depends on the Pilsner malt I'm using, but ideally if it's something like a Heidelberg or a Best Malts or a Weirmann Pils, any of those work really well in this sense. You still get a really good color, sort of not massive pickup, but like enough that it's still really pale, still really, light, but it sort of locks in your fermentability really nicely, and you get a little bit more sort of heft. So I don't really feel like I need to add things like a 2-row or anything like that, which I have done that before. One thing that I'm working on right now is actually playing around with sort of all sorts of different beers, but specifically as well West Coast in this context, using a bunch of adjuncts similar to sort of cold IPA sort of production. I do a lot of cereal mashing as well. So our light lager Bench Life, some of you guys may have had it the other night, is like 25, almost 30% corn. And that's corn grits that we do a cereal mash on. And so that's also a profile that I'm really interested in putting a bunch of sort of layered fruity hops on top of at some point, because I really love adjunct lagers. I love adjunct brewing. I like the process of cereal mashing because I'm a masochist, and yeah. And my team is going to be so pissed hearing this. They're back home cereal mashing right now, probably. Yeah. So, but anyway, that's kind of where my mindset is like trying to keep it as basic as possible. Although sometimes I can get a little complicated with Pilsner malts. Like sometimes I have 100% Pilsner beer, but it's actually more than one Pilsner. It's like different Pilsners from different maltsters or different types of Pilsner. And then I do weird shit with each one of those. Like sometimes it's like this one is getting this and this one's not getting this. And again, you'll hear me talk about that later. But yeah, that's kind of usually how I think of malt profile for them.
How about you, Evan? How do you use malt in these hobby lagers?
Yeah, we I think have continued to kind of take a opposite approach of sorts where the malt is the last thing I want to taste. And so for our hoppy pills or West Coast pills right now is a Weirmann Pilsner malt with some spelt. There's, I think, a little bit of this kind of grassiness that comes from the Weirmann Pils that I like, that I think works with all of what that is. But since it's kind of the last thing I want to taste, we have, and that there's so many different ways to structure a beer, and there's not one answer that's correct. I think it's been fun for us to just keep this base the same and then sort of turn all the other little knobs in order to get the profile that we're looking for. We'll be serving a West Coast Pils tonight for the beer dinner, and so excited for you all to try our take on it. But yeah, I think the less malt, the better.
No, we've just heard spelt twice here, but in some small amounts. Tell me about that and kind of percentages in general space, and what do you think it adds at that kind of level? I mean, broadly speaking, I don't need an exact percentage number.
Just pulling up my notes. No big whoop.
We got a brew sheet. We're referencing brew sheets.
Okay, I don't have percentages on this brew sheet. There's 2 bags.
2 bags.
2 bags. No, I think it's like 8% spelt. Same with the Carafoam as well. But yeah, I like spelt's been fun for us. I think we really see better foam stability there with some spelt in there, and so and then not too much of this like flavor contribution that is getting in the way, because I don't want that shit in the way.
Let's talk about
Chris.
Yeah. Let's talk
That's
about
a whole ass malt profile, man. That's a whole ass malt profile.
Okay, we're cracking ourselves up over this tiki bar we went to last night. It was a whole ass tiki bar. Couldn't get over that he said it like that. So
Yeah, I came around the corner. There was a tiki bar behind it, high wire, and I came around the corner and nobody saw it. And I came around, I was like, man, it's a whole ass tiki bar back here. And he thought that was hilarious. I said whole ass. So I was
I've never heard anybody say that.
So the whole time it's like, man, it's a whole ass room full of people. So it's just silly.
So we were using it for everything last night.
I'm from Memphis, so,
And then to the tequila bar as well.
All right. Brewers retreat in full effect. Let's talk a little bit about fermentation. Again, using this Weihenstephan or 3470 strain or variant, or since again you're using this also typically in West Coast IPA while using it in these West Coast Pilsners. Is there a way you treat that yeast for the fermentation in different ways? And that IPA brewed with this yeast, you're really looking to minimize that sulfur character, looking to pull that kind of neutrality and let those hops jump forward, where in this West Coast Pils, you want some of that fermentation character. How do you shift your approach to fermentation depending on what the goal is for these beers?
I think that's like probably one of the trickiest things to work out with this beer style is so many brewers want to think about this from more of a classic or traditional route and go, I'm making a Pilsner. I'm going to knock out at 46 degrees, and then I'm going to ferment at 48 degrees, or I'm going to, do a range of these sort of things. And I think that you kind of have to throw tradition out the window a little bit here with this beer style, and then kind of utilize it more like a steam beer fermentation type of thing, because there's this level of sulfur that is perfectly appropriate. And we're talking about sulfur dioxide here, not DMS, not hydrogen sulfide or other sulfurs that are created that we absolutely do not want in there. But there's this there's a range of sort of ways to get there. And I think Bob has really come up with a great ramping of the temperature throughout fermentation that he can talk about that I think is cool. But then there's this spot that exists kind of before dry hopping of just analyzing this beer and seeing all right, did we do it all right before we throw in these hops? We do a lot of just head swapping at our brewery, where we are just changing the CO2 in the head space by just purging that out with brand new CO2. And this really seems to help bring down sulfur levels to this appropriate level where the sulfur dioxide is just the right level to add some freshness to these beers and make some of these hops pop in a way that Chico just can't do, and some of these other yeast strains can't do, and then create this, hopefully, this really great tropical character. When the sulfur level is too high, it really throws this pretty big onion garlic thing or dank thing and it really highlights it in a negative way. And so it's we don't have the equipment at our brewery to test the levels of sulfur dioxide, but I think that would be one of the it's one of the sort of rabbit holes to go down, is finding this perfect level that really shows that off best.
How about you, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I think that understanding your fermentation is sort of the most important thing of making good beer. I think you can pick all the ingredients you want, but if you don't have an understanding and sort of control over your fermentation, it's easy to get lost. And the beers, can get messier and messier. So, for us, it's we're 11 years in at the brewery, and we're definitely still trying to get a better understanding of our fermentation. I think the thing that I continue to come to is sort of, I think first it comes to a sensory of understanding of what it is you're experiencing. I think, Evan points out very keenly that sulfur dioxide is maybe what we're looking for, and not hydrogen sulfide or DMS. So being able to clearly identify what it is you want in your fermentation profile, to then do a little bit of digging to know what knobs you turn to turn that up or turn it down, sort of a thing. So, for us, we think that first 24 to 48 hours of fermentation is probably where the best lagers are made. And I think that they're I always push back against like, oh, it's got to be lagered forever and it's got to do these things. And it's like, well, you can probably like control most of your variables when you're knocking out and in those first 48 hours. And so, it's continuing to get an understanding of what's happening at that point in time. So, to kind of go back to your original like question, like how are they fermented? What temperatures? We approach most of our lagers in a very similar way, and maybe they have little tweaks here or there that make them different. But, we're maybe, knocking out at 51 or 52, and we're then fermenting at 52 or 53 for the first, say, 35% of fermentation. And then we do a controlled ramp up to whatever, if it's a West Coast Pils or West Coast IPA, we're doing a controlled ramp up to our ideal dry hopping temperature. And there's not a lot of difference currently between a West Coast Pils and a West Coast IPA for us in that like structured fermentation process. I kind of have, I try to externalize all my notes because I forget a lot of shit. And that's one of my current notes is like trying to better understand and manipulate our fermentations so that our West Coast Pils are a little more like thiol sulfur leaning and our West Coast IPAs are a little less. And so, that I think that we try to control all the variables, what are our oxygenation rates and the measured oxygen of our knockouts, what are the nutrient load that we're adding, what is the temperature and the temperature throughout. And, for us, we also find that there's a huge impact on temperature. This is probably the hardest and most uncontrolled for us is that we do get hop creep. So, we're harvesting yeast on like day 6 or 7, and we start dry hopping warm because we like the warm dry hop expression. That's kind of become our preference. But because we're not fermenting out super dry like a lot of West Coast hoppy beer producers are doing, and we're wanting a little bit more of that body, we end up in this world where we're getting a secondary fermentation from hop creep, which is a little less controlled. And once again, we have this lager yeast, and we're now at 65 degrees, and we're getting, a half Plato to a Plato fermentation. And so that becomes actually a pretty big impactor of flavor and fermentation character for our beers, in that you're getting this secondary sulfur diacetyl acetaldehyde. And I would say that acetaldehyde becomes like the marker that we're wrestling with the most, because diacetyl we can control a little bit better. We have, we utilize enzymes, and I think we have a little bit better handle of controlling that. And I think with sulfur too, but acetaldehyde is this like, pathway where our yeast aren't as healthy at that point. They're in a rough environment, and we're getting more flavor development. So, long-winded answer, but I think it's kind of walking through that fermentation impact and throughout the process and things that we're trying to, we're trying to improve our labs so we can, understand them more, but we're kind of just pawing at it right now.
I have so many more questions, and we could probably go for another 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and still not cover all of them. But we need to make some time for our next panel. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Evan. We'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to be back. And for the next panel, we have an incredibly special one with Vinny and Brian Grossman, and they are going to walk through some stuff around Brettanomyces.
That's it. Hope you enjoyed this panel discussion recorded in the high gravity room at Sierra Nevada Brewing Company in Mills River, North Carolina this past early November. Big thanks to Bob, Chris, and Evan for sharing their thoughts on brewing with all of us. With G&D Chiller's 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Berkeley Yeast's Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. Custom blend development is available through the innovative Old Orchard R&D Lab. Give your customers a pleasant surprise with Audacia from Indie Hops in your next IPA. Santa Clean PAA Pro from 5 Star Chemicals is tough on beer stone and perfect for everything from kegs to packaging lines. PacTex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. Heartprint has your back from concept to can with fast turnarounds and no minimums. And Brightly software enhances your data-driven decision-making. It's Black Friday today, and that means tomorrow is Small Business Saturday. As a small independent media business, we rely on your support to bring you great conversations, stories, videos, and events featuring some of the most inspiring brewers from around the world. If you're a subscriber already, then thank you for supporting our work. If you're not a subscriber, now would be the perfect time to go to beerandbrewing.com and click on that subscribe button. Just know that in this spirit of the season, I am thankful for all of you who read, view, listen, week in, week out. Thanks for your trust. Thanks for your time. None of us here at Craft Beer and Brewing take that for granted. We'll be back next week. Cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.